The wind swept across the open plains of Montana, carrying with it the soft hum of crickets and the distant moan of a train that hadn't stopped in this small forgotten town for over a decade. The sky stretched endlessly, painted in gold and rose, as if heaven itself had spilled its colors over the earth. On the far edge of that dying sunset stood a girl, her reflection caught faintly in the cracked window of an old diner. Her name was Clara Mae Dawson, and though her hair shimmered like honey in the fading light, she didn't see beauty in herself. Her hands were rough from work, her dress faded, and her eyes, though white and green as spring meadows, held the weary look of someone who'd learned too young that life wasn't kind to soft hearts. She had come to this quiet corner of nowhere to escape the noise of a world that measured worth by makeup, followers, and filters. The old diner, Millie's Place, had given her a job washing dishes, serving coffee, and sweeping floors when no one else would. Every day, she'd wipe tables, refill mugs, and watch through the fogged windows as dust trails disappeared down the long dirt road. Until one day, he rode in. The kind of man stories were written about, tall, quiet, with the kind of eyes that seemed to have seen both heaven and hell. His name was Jack Callahan, a cowboy with boots that carried the weight of 1,000 miles and a heart that carried more scars than most men's bodies. The door creaked when he entered, his shadow long and his hat tilted low. The diner fell silent for a heartbeat, the sound of boots on wood echoing like thunder. Clara's hands trembled as she poured his coffee, spilling a little onto the saucer. "Sorry," she whispered, avoiding his eyes. "Ain't nothing to be sorry about," he said in that low, gravel-warmed voice that could melt stone if it wanted to. "Coffee's coffee. Spills happen." She gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and he noticed, cowboys notice everything that others miss. He took a slow sip, nodding as if to say it was the best thing he'd had in weeks. For days, he came back, same stool, same coffee, same quiet calm. Sometimes he'd talk about the horses he broke or the fences he mended on his ranch out by Devil's Ridge. Sometimes he'd just sit, lost in thought, watching the storm clouds roll in. And Clara found herself looking forward to those few minutes between sunrise and sunset when the cowboy's presence filled the diner like warm light through dusty windows. But one night, after closing, she caught her reflection again in that same cracked glass and sighed. Her cheeks were red from the day's work, her apron stained, her hair a mess. "I'm not pretty," she whispered to the empty room. She didn't know he was still there, leaning against the doorway, hat in hand. He stepped closer, his boots slow on the wood, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. "That's fine," he said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "I need honest, not fancy." Clara froze, her heart skipping a beat, her throat tightening around words that wouldn't come. No man had ever said that to her, not in a world where pretty faces got everything and plain ones got ignored. She turned to look at him, tears brimming in her tired eyes. "You don't mean that," she said. "You just feel sorry for me." But Jack shook his head. "Darlin', I've seen fancy. I've danced with pretty. I've kissed charm that turned to poison come morning. But honest's the kind of rare a man don't find twice." His voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, Clara saw past his rugged calm. She saw pain, real, raw, bone-deep pain. The kind that only truth could heal. From that night, something changed. Jack would show up not just for coffee but to fix the squeaky back door, to chop firewood, to mend the old fence behind the diner. He didn't ask for payment. "You're feedin' me good," he'd say, grinning. "That's fair trade." Clara started laughing again, soft, uncertain at first, but it was laughter all the same. The kind that sounded like wind chimes after a storm. As weeks passed, the town started whispering about the cowboy who kept coming back, and the quiet girl who seemed to bloom whenever he walked in. But life in small towns has a way of testing gentle things. One morning, a woman rode in from the city, a woman who looked like money and perfume. She stepped out of her shiny black car like she owned the ground it rolled on. Clara was wiping the counter when she walked in, the bell chiming sharply. "I'm lookin' for Jack Callahan," the woman said, her red lips curling like a challenge. Jack was sitting in his usual spot. He didn't turn around, just muttered, "Ain't nothin' left to say, Lisa." The woman laughed, cruel and cold. "You walked out on me without a word, Jack. Thought you could hide out here with," her eyes flicked to Clara. "With this." That word hit like a slap. Clara's stomach turned, her hands gripping the counter till her knuckles went white. Jack stood, slow and deliberate. "You'd best leave her out of your business," he said quietly. "She's got more soul than you'll ever understand." Lisa scoffed, tossed her hair, and left, the sound of her heels fading into the hum of the road. Clara wanted to disappear, but Jack turned to her, eyes full of something fierce and kind. "Don't you dare believe a word that woman said. She's the reason I left the city. She's what fancy looks like when the shine wears off." That night, as the stars spilled across the black sky, Clara sat on the porch while Jack fixed a lantern. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full. Full of everything they didn't yet have words for. "You really think I'm honest?" she finally asked, her voice small. Jack looked up at her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "I know you are," he said. "You don't hide behind paint or pretty words. You just show up, real. That's what a man remembers when the lights go out." She felt something bloom inside her, hope, fragile but alive. Maybe she wasn't pretty by the world's standards, but for the first time, she didn't care. Maybe honesty, kindness, and quiet strength were their own kind of beauty. The night stretched on, the stars blinking like old souls watching over them, and the cowboy sat beside the girl who didn't know she was beautiful, promising himself that come what may, he'd show her just how wrong she'd been about herself. The world didn't need another fancy face, it needed hearts like hers. The days that followed that star-soaked night carried a quiet kind of peace, one that Clara hadn't known she'd been missing her whole life. The morning sun would rise over the wheat fields like a slow golden tide, washing the diner in light, and there he'd be, Jack Callahan, already waiting on the porch with 2 cups of steaming coffee and that lazy, honest smile that made her heartbeat stumble every single time. He had a way of making silence feel safe, of turning the smallest things, a shared cup, a wordless glance, a moment of laughter, into something that felt bigger than both of them. Still, under all that calm, Clara could feel a question brewing like a summer storm. Who was Jack Callahan before this quiet life? What kind of pain sat behind those steel-gray eyes? And why, when the wind blew just right, did he look toward the horizon like a man expecting trouble to come riding in? The answer came one dusty afternoon. Clara was restocking shelves when the sound of horses filled the air, 3 of them, rough-looking men on their backs, eyes sharp and hard. Jack was out behind the diner fixing the fence when they pulled up. The biggest one, a bearded man with a scar running down his cheek, called out, "Well, I'll be damned, Jack Callahan. Thought you were dead." Jack stood slowly, the hammer still in his hand. "Could be," he said quietly. "But I'm not. What do you want, Wade?" The man grinned, ugly and mean. "You owe me, cowboy. You walked away from our deal, and now I'm here to collect." Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear. Jack's voice was calm but low, like a river before it floods. "That life's done. You and me both know it never led anywhere good." Wade's grin widened. "Maybe. But I still want what's mine." His eyes slid to Clara. "And looks like you found yourself a little reward in this dusty hole." Jack stepped between them faster than thought, his shadow cutting across her like a shield. "Don't," he said, voice like iron. "Don't even look her way." For a long, tense second, no one breathed. Then Wade spat on the dirt, swung up on his horse, and said, "You got 1 week, Callahan. Then I come back." The men rode off, leaving only dust and the sound of Clara's shaking breath behind. She stared at Jack, confusion and fear twisting her chest. "Who were they?" she asked, her voice breaking. Jack took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Men I used to ride with," he said softly. "Before I came here. Before I figured out what kind of man I wanted to be." He looked at her then, really looked, and the shame in his eyes hurt more than the fear. "I wasn't good, Clara. I did things for money that I ain't proud of. I thought I could outrun it." Clara stepped closer, her heart aching at the honesty in his words. "You left it behind," she said. "That's what matters." But he shook his head. "Trouble's got a way of findin' folks who try to do right." For a few days, that shadow hung over them. Jack worked harder, quieter, his eyes always scanning the road. Clara tried to keep things normal. She baked pies, served coffee, smiled for the locals, but the laughter between them had dimmed. One evening, after closing, she found him sitting on the porch, the sunset bleeding red across the sky. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. Jack didn't answer at first. Then he said, I know they will. And when they do, I'll be ready. Clara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. You can't fight them alone, Jack. You don't have to. He smiled sadly. Some things a man's gotta finish himself. The words hit her like a goodbye. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing his voice, seeing his shadow under the moonlight. So when she woke before dawn and saw the empty porch, she knew. He'd gone to face them. The fear in her chest turned to fire. She grabbed her coat and ran to the stable behind the diner, saddling the old bay mare they used for deliveries. The morning air was cold, biting at her cheeks, but she rode hard, following the faint trail of hoofprints leading toward Devil's Ridge. The ridge rose like a scar from the land, sharp, lonely, and cruel. She heard voices before she saw them, Jack's calm tone and Wade's angry snarl. You should have stayed gone, Callahan, Wade spat. Could have kept the girl, the peace, the lie. Ain't a lie, Jack said. It's the first truth I ever had. Clara stepped out from behind the rocks before she could stop herself. Then you're not losing it now, she said, voice trembling but fierce. Jack turned, eyes wide. Clara, go back. No, she said. Not this time. Wade laughed. How sweet. The little waitress thinks she's brave. He pulled a gun from his belt. The sound of it cocking split the air. Jack moved fast, faster than she'd ever seen, stepping in front of her, shouting, Wade, don't. The shot rang out, echoing through the canyons. Birds exploded from the trees. Clara screamed. Jack stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Rage, wild and unthinking, filled her chest. She grabbed the fallen hammer from the ground and swung, hitting Wade's arm. The gun went off again, into the dirt this time. Jack tackled him, the two men rolling in the dust, fists flying, blood mixing with sweat and dirt. Finally, Jack pinned him down, his breath ragged. It's over, he said, voice hoarse. You're done. Wade spat blood, sneering. You'll never be more than a broken man in a broken town. Jack stood, eyes dark. Maybe. But at least I'll be an honest one. He turned away, leaving Wade coughing in the dirt. Clara rushed to him, pressing her hands over the wound on his shoulder, tears streaming down her face. You could have died, she cried. Jack winced, but smiled. Worth it, he said softly. Worth it to know I ain't runnin' no more. They rode back slow, the sun rising behind them, painting the sky gold again. Back at the diner, she cleaned his wound, her hands gentle but firm. You're crazy, she whispered. Yeah, he said with a grin. Crazy about you, I reckon. She laughed through her tears, and that sound filled the little room like sunlight. The days after that felt different. The town heard what happened, and for the first time, folks looked at Clara not as the quiet, plain girl behind the counter, but as someone strong, someone fierce. Jack's wound healed, and with it, so did something inside both of them. One evening, weeks later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Clara said quietly, You could have died for me. Jack shook his head. No, darlin', I lived because of you. You showed me what real looks like. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time in her life, she believed she was enough, more than enough. The girl who once whispered she wasn't pretty had found a love that didn't need pretty. It needed truth. It needed courage. It needed her. And as the crickets sang and the fireflies danced across the open fields, Jack took her hand, rough and scarred and beautiful in its honesty, and said, You know, Clara, I think you're the prettiest thing I ever saw. She smiled, shaking her head. You're a terrible liar, Cowboy. He laughed, pulling her closer. Maybe. But I'm an honest one. The stars burned brighter, the world quieted, and the wind whispered through the fields, soft, eternal, like the voice of love itself.